The reading of my grandmother's will was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October, and I almost didn't go. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew exactly how it would feel to sit in that room with people who had spent the last 40 years treating her like an inconvenience and were now prepared to fight each other over her china. I drove myself to the lawyer's office in my 10-year-old Civic, the one with the cracked dashboard and the passenger window that wouldn't roll all the way down. I wore the same black dress I'd worn to her funeral 3 days earlier. I hadn't bought anything new. I didn't think I needed to. When I walked into the lobby, my uncle was already there, standing by the front desk in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was something left on the doorstep that nobody quite knew what to do with. He gave me a small nod. I gave him one back. That was the full extent of our warmth. My aunt arrived 10 minutes later with my 2 cousins. There was the usual performance of hugging and murmuring about what a tragedy it all was, how wonderful she had been, how much they would miss her. I watched it from a chair in the corner and said nothing. I had learned a long time ago that saying nothing was usually the right choice in rooms like this. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My grandmother was not a warm woman. I want to be honest about that because some people tell these stories and they sand off all the rough edges, and by the end, the difficult person becomes a saint and the whole thing feels fake. She was not a saint. She was sharp and demanding, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you had already failed at whatever you were about to attempt. She kept her house at 68 degrees year-round. She ate the same breakfast every morning: black coffee, 1 piece of toast, half a grapefruit, and she did not believe in what she called performative affection. She never told me she loved me, not once, in 31 years. But she showed up. That was the thing nobody ever talked about, because it wasn't as easy to see as flowers or birthday cards or the kind of love that announces itself. She showed up at my middle school concert when my parents couldn't be bothered to leave their dinner party. She drove 45 minutes each way to pick me up from the hospital when I had my appendix out at 19 and didn't have anyone to call. When I got laid off from my first real job and spent 3 weeks barely getting out of bed, she didn't call to check in or send a card. She drove over, let herself in with the spare key, made me eat a bowl of soup, and sat across from me at my kitchen table for 2 hours without saying very much at all. Just being there. Just making it harder to disappear entirely. She was not soft, but she was present. My grandmother had money. Not the kind of money that announces itself. No vacation home, no new car every 2 years, no jewelry that caught the light. She lived in the same house she'd bought in 1974, drove a 15-year-old Buick she refused to replace, and clipped grocery coupons until the week she died. When I was young, I assumed she was just frugal the way her generation often was. Careful with money the way people get when they've lived through uncertain times. I found out the truth when I was 24. I was helping her sort through some papers. She had a system that made sense only to her, and I came across a statement from her investment account. I only saw it for a moment before she calmly took it from my hands and put it face down on the table. But I had seen enough. The number had 7 figures. Comfortably 7 figures. I never mentioned it. She never mentioned it, and somehow, without either of us saying a word, that became the understanding between us. This was not a topic. She was not her money. She never had been, and she didn't intend to start being it now. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that she was watching. Not in a suspicious way. Not in the way of someone who tests people and gloats when they fail. More like she was paying attention when everyone else had stopped. She noticed things. She filed them away, and she made decisions slowly over decades that nobody around her understood were even being made. Growing up, I spent more time with her than any of my cousins. Not because my parents arranged it, and not because I was particularly angling for anything. I was a child. I had no idea there was anything to angle for. I just liked being around her. She let me read at the table. She didn't ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. She taught me to make proper pie crust and told me that most people rush it, and that's why most pie crusts aren't worth eating. She told me that the world would try very hard to convince me that busy was the same thing as important and that I should not fall for it. She was not affectionate, but she was interesting, And when you're a kid who feels a little sideways in her own family, interesting matters more than you can say. My cousins found her difficult. I heard this from their parents, filtered through the particular tone adults use when they think children aren't paying attention, too rigid, too critical. She had told my older cousin at Thanksgiving one year that his business plan had 3 fundamental problems, and she had named them clearly, one by one. He didn't speak to her for 8 months. She didn't seem particularly bothered by this. She had opinions. She expressed them, she did not apologize for them. As I got older and moved out and started building my own life, such as it was, assistant manager at a small insurance office, 1-bedroom apartment, a cat named after a jazz musician my grandmother had mentioned once, and whose music I then felt obligated to actually listen to. I kept in touch with her in the way that felt natural. I called on Sundays. I stopped by when I could. We had lunch every few months at the same diner she'd been going to for 30 years, where the waitress knew her order and she always left a $20 tip regardless of what she'd spent. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly notable. It was just consistent. The way a lot of the things that matter most in life are consistent. Not loud, not performed, just quietly, reliably there. She got sick the spring I turned 30. Lung cancer, which surprised everyone who knew her because she'd never smoked a day in her life. She handled it the way she handled everything. She gathered the relevant information, she made her decisions, and she did not spend a great deal of time asking why it was happening to her. She called to tell me on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner. She said, "I want you to know before anyone else does, and I want you to know that I've already spoken to my doctor and I understand what I'm looking at, so you don't need to panic." Then she asked what I was making. We talked about pasta for a few minutes. She told me most people undersalt their pasta water and that it was one of the more correctable mistakes a person could make. The next 18 months were hard. I'm not going to dress that up. I picked up more of her grocery runs, drove her to appointments when she let me, which wasn't always. She had her own way of managing things and didn't always want company in the managing. But I was available. I tried to read her signals. I tried not to smother her or make her feel fragile because I knew she would hate that more than the illness itself. My family descended during the last few months. Not the whole time. They had their own lives, their own complications. But there were visits, weekends, a kind of heightened attentiveness that felt new and strange and that my grandmother observed without comment. My uncle, who had lived an hour and a half away for 20 years and averaged maybe 3 visits annually, suddenly appeared with some regularity. My cousins called more. My aunt brought casseroles. I noticed. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. My grandmother died on a Thursday in September, quietly in her own house, the way she had wanted. I was there. I had been there since the previous morning. Her actual last hours were calm. She had good medication. She wasn't in pain. She slept more than she was awake. At some point in the early morning, she stopped breathing, and the house was very quiet, and I sat with her for a while before I called anyone. 3 days later, I was at her funeral, watching people cry who I had not seen cry for anything before, listening to a minister talk about her who had met her exactly twice, and trying to figure out where to put my hands. And then Tuesday came, the will reading. The lawyer's name was Mr. Whitfield. He was in his late 60s, methodical, unhurried, the kind of man who had sat across from a lot of families in rooms like this, and had learned not to take any of it personally. He waited until everyone had arranged themselves, my uncle, my aunt, my 2 cousins, and me, spread across the chairs in his conference room with the specific geometry of people who don't want to sit too close to each other. And then he opened the folder in front of him. He began with the smaller items. A few charitable bequests, specific and thoughtful. A literacy organization she'd volunteered with 30 years ago, her local library's children's section, a fund at the community college that supported returning adult students. My uncle shifted in his seat but said nothing. The casserole aunt folded her hands tightly in her lap. Then Mr. Whitfield looked up. He said that the remainder of the estate, the house, the investments, all of it, was to be left to me. Entirely. Without condition. The room got very quiet in a way that was different from silence. My uncle's jaw tightened. One of my cousins made a sound like she'd started to say something and then thought better of it. My aunt looked at the table. I didn't move. I don't think I breathed for a moment. I had not expected this. Not any of it. I had been coming because she was my grandmother. Because she had died. Because you show up. That was all. Mr. Whitfield was watching me. He said quietly that there was also a letter. He slid it across the table. It was in an envelope with my name on it, written in her handwriting, the careful vertical script she'd had her whole life. I opened it there, in that room, while everyone else sat and waited and the air felt thin. She had written it 6 months earlier, when she still had enough energy to write longhand. It wasn't long. She wasn't a person who used more words than she needed. She wrote that she had thought carefully, over many years, about what to do. She wrote that money reveals things about people, and that she had watched what it revealed for a long time. She wrote that I had never treated her differently based on what I knew or suspected about her finances. She wrote that I had been present, not performatively, not strategically, but genuinely, in the unglamorous and ordinary ways that presence actually looks like. The Sunday phone calls, the grocery runs, the fact that I had been there on the morning she died and had let her have that quietly without making it into something about my own grief. She wrote that she knew she had not been easy to love. She knew this. She wrote that she had wondered, sometimes, if her difficulty was fair to the people around her. And then she wrote something I have thought about every day since. She wrote, I was hard on the world because the world is hard, and I wanted you to be ready. I watched you get ready. I am proud of you in ways I did not know how to say while I was alive. I am sorry for that, but I hope this says it clearly enough. I put the letter face down on the table. I was not going to cry in that room, not in front of all of them. My uncle said after a long pause that he thought there might be grounds to contest. Mr. Whitfield said very calmly that the document had been prepared and reviewed with great care and that she had been fully competent and unambiguous in her wishes, and that he would be happy to discuss that further at another time in a different setting. My uncle said nothing else. I drove home alone. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex for a long time. The Civic with the cracked dashboard in the window that wouldn't roll all the way down. I sat there and I read the letter again, twice, and then I folded it carefully and put it in my coat pocket. The weeks after were complicated in the practical ways that grief always gets complicated by logistics. There were accounts to transfer, a house to think about, decisions I wasn't prepared to make quickly and tried not to. I hired an estate attorney, not Mr. Zentu Whitfield, who had been her lawyer. I needed someone working for me, and I took things one step at a time. I did not quit my job right away, not because I had to keep it, but because I needed something to stay the same while everything else was changing. I needed the alarm clock and the commute and the small rituals of ordinary working life while I tried to understand what had just happened to me. I thought about the question a lot. Not the money itself, but what she had been trying to say, what she had been trying to do. Whether it was right or fair, and what fair even meant in a situation like this. I came to believe that she had been consistent, that the way she gave was the same as the way she lived. Not with announcement, not with softness, not in ways that made you feel good in the moment, but with something solid underneath. With actual thought, with the precision of care that didn't look like care until you stepped back far enough to see the whole shape of it. She had paid attention for 31 years, and then she had said so in the only language she really trusted. I think about what she said about being hard on the world. I think about it because I understand it now in a way I couldn't have before. The world does not get easier because you are good at it. It does not reward consistency or presence or showing up without announcement. It mostly just keeps going, requiring things of you, presenting you with situations you did not ask for and would not have chosen. But I think she believed, I know she believed because she wrote it, that how you move through it matters. Not for the reward at the end, not for the letter from the lawyer, just because the moving through is the thing itself and you might as well do it right. I have her pie crust recipe now, written in her handwriting on an index card she kept in the kitchen drawer. I made it last winter for the first time and I undersalted the dough and it wasn't quite right. I'll do it again. I'll get there. I keep the letter in the drawer of my nightstand. I don't read it often. I don't need to anymore. I think I have memorized every word without trying to, the way you memorize the things that change you. She was not easy. She was not warm. Not in the way that shows on the surface. She did not tell me she loved me. But she had been paying attention. All that time, she had been paying attention. And in the end, that turned out to be the same thing. I still think about the Tuesday morning I sat in Mr. Whitfield's conference room, watching my uncle straighten his tie while my aunt folded and refolded her hands in her lap. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about a bowl of soup on a bad afternoon and a woman who drove 45 minutes without being asked. That's the thing nobody tells you about cause and effect. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up in the moment you're doing the right thing and hand you a receipt. It accumulates quietly over years in the spaces between the choices other people weren't watching closely enough to notice. My grandmother was watching. She was always watching. And what she saw, what ultimately mattered to her, wasn't grand gestures or carefully timed appearances. It was whether I showed up when there was nothing to gain from showing up. I think about integrity a lot now. Not the word itself, which has gotten thin from overuse, but the actual texture of it, the way it feels to do something right when you're tired and no one is looking, and it would be genuinely easier not to. The Sunday phone calls I made when I didn't feel like talking. The grocery runs. The morning I sat with her while she was dying and didn't make it into a moment about me. None of it felt meaningful at the time. It just felt like what you do. And I think that's exactly the point. The things that end up defining you rarely feel significant while you're doing them. She was smart in a way I'm still catching up to. She understood that money without judgment is just pressure in a different shape. So she waited. She watched how I handled not having it, how I made decisions, whether I could tell the difference between what I wanted and what I actually needed. She was measuring something that most people don't think to measure. Not ambition, not talent, but the quality of a person's thinking when the stakes feel low. That kind of discernment, the ability to see clearly and act on what you see, is something I'm still learning to trust in myself. And then there's the question of keeping going. I worked a job I was overqualified for and drove a car with a cracked dashboard, and I didn't quit either of them out of self-pity or pride. Not because I had no other options, but because I understood that what you build slowly tends to hold. She built slowly. She clipped coupons and drove a 15-year-old Buick and left behind enough to change my life entirely because she never confused discomfort with failure. I think about that when things are hard. I think about it when I'm tempted to take the shortcut that costs something I can't name yet. The letter is in my nightstand drawer. I don't need to read it anymore. I've already internalized the thing she was trying to say. That love doesn't always sound like love when you're inside it. That the people paying the closest attention aren't always the loudest ones in the room, and that a life built on showing up, thinking clearly, and refusing to quit tends to compound in ways you can't predict and didn't plan for. She was right about the pie crust too. Most people do rush it. I'm getting better.